Ok, ciao a tutti e benvenuti a RUBYDAY. Io sono Luca Guidi, Giodoscia su Twitter e scusate, lucaguidi.com è il mio personal weblog e lavoro presso Litmus, che è una società basata a Boston che si occupa di campaign di marketing analytics sulle campagne di monitoraggio, spam filter, HTML code analysis. We can switch English, I prefer. Okay, so today I want to talk about Ruby on Rails, of course, and why, in my opinion, it has revolutionized the web development process and world, and specifically about my personal history with Ruby on Rails. It was the 2005, and I watched the famous DHH screencast when he shown how to build in 15 minutes, tests included, a weblog, and it was mind-blowing. At that time, I was a Java consulting for an enterprise company, and my day job consisted in fighting day by day with Hibernate, with all the XML configuration files, and the same thing was true for struts and to try to expose some HTTP endpoints. So I decided to learn Rails and Ruby, of course, and make Rails my tool of choice for web development. And apart from the criticism that I'm sharing with you today, I think it still is one of the most advantage framework for web development. So, in that screencast, what caught my attention was this concept mentioned over configuration. That means you don't have to deal with XML files. Everything happens magically for you, and it saves you a lot of time and, of course, money. And another thing that I think, another key point about the Ruby on Rails success, I think it's the ecosystem. I mean, you know the Ruby community. You know how we think about software. You know how we think about products. If you think about GitHub, Heroku, Travis, all those products was born in our community and then eventually expanded their market in other languages. But I think we are some way unique if compared with other technical communities. So this is, in my opinion, the second successful point about Ruby on Rails success. And of course, the third one, productivity and developer happiness. This is a goal shared with Ruby itself. Yukiro Matsumoto, Ruby's creator, always claimed that the language was built in the first place around productivity and around the developer, with a concept and a way of thinking more closer to humans than computers. But I started using and working with Rails since the early days. And as you probably know, the framework is almost 10 years old, and a lot of legacy code is around. And we have to deal, of course, with this legacy code. Litmus itself was born in 2006, and we have tons of old plugins, fixtures still in place, and of course this represents a lot of legacy to deal with and a lot of amount of work that slow you down in your development process. And if you ever experienced an upgrade from an application which used Rails 2 to Rails 3, you probably experienced some frustration. It was a time-consuming process, error-prone, just for make your application to start, not your test to pass. And of course, you wasted your time, and your company wasted their money. So at that time, I started wondering why even if I followed all the guidelines that the community told me to follow and all the prescriptions that all the public API told me to follow, why I'm in this situation, why it's so painful to upgrade between major releases. Of course, at that time there was the famous merge with MERB, but it wasn't in some way justified to spend too much time, because the framework itself, it's not so much important from a product perspective. So today I want to share with you my opinions about the fallacies and the pitfalls in public API of Ruby on Rails, and how we can mitigate those problems in day-by-day job. So, active record. So this is the beloved and hated ORM that is shipped by default with Ruby on Rails, and I think it has a main problem, a main sin. It tends to merge models with records, which of course are something, obviously are something different. Models are basically describing your application behaviors. Records are just a facility to that layer to eventually persist some data. And why this is so much important? Because we tend to, we tend to model our public API of that domain model around active record. And if we need to move away from active record, and if we need to jump in the newer version, we need to change everything basically in our application. So that was one of the biggest problems that I ran into at that time when I tried to upgrade to a newer version of Rails. Encapsulations violations. As you know, active record automatically maps all the database columns with getter and setters. And from an outside perspective, we are able to alter and read the state of an object. And of course, this is wrong, because how many times have you seen code like this? Can you read? So what's wrong with this? I know that my article object has a state column, first code smell. It is a string, second one, and it can be published. And I react to this internal and private state with altering its state with updating a database column. How we can mitigate this problem? Of course, this is a simplified snippet to stimulate this problem, to show this problem. How we can move away from this? With this solution, look, this is logically equivalent to the previous slide, but it's better because we moved away from the public API of Ruby on Rails. And I encourage you to do the same, because it's a productivity boost. You gain in productivity on a day-by-day basis. And of course, if you look at the previous slide, article update attribute means nothing in terms of your weblog application. Publish is more meaningful. And this leads us to another problem, implicit versus explicit API. I call this problem like this. What is the explicit API? The explicit API is something that declares the intent of the developer, and the implicit one is the alternate version built around active record public API. I'll show you an example. Suppose this is a controller snippet, and we have a table with a list of records, and we want to show just the 5 most recent articles in our blog. So you are used to this code, and of course you can tell what we are trying to do here. But there is a problem. First of all, this is an implicit version of my intent. This can be better, you know? And this is the communication problem that the codes, of course, has, the codes that's built with Ruby on Rails. And we are leaking some way database details, because where order and limit are database a facility, a Ruby facility around SQL, we are leaking all these details into another layer. And of course, this is much, much more easier to test because we can stop just this method instead of having all the problems with the active record querying API. Another problem, sorry, it's the callback abuse. Why callbacks are so wrong and they're being removed from active record 4? Because we tend to merge here persistent logic with non-persistent one. How many times you have delivered an email after creating a user object? So, of course, if you have just one single point of user creation, you don't have problems with this. But if you need to create a record from outside from the sign up feature, you probably will add a guard around that callback. So we are opening logical branches in our code that, of course, increase both the production and testing code, because each if represents a logical branch that needs to be tested, of course. So they've been removed. And, of course, testability issues that I mentioned just now. Michael Feathers wrote a beautiful book that's called Work Effectively with Legacy Code. And in the first pages, you can find this sentence. A test is not a unit test if it talks to a database. And you know that this is the opposite of what, by default, Active Record does. So we are some way tangled with our models are some way coupled with the database, and that's why our test suite are so slow. Any thoughts to share? Any make sense to you? So, I want to show you other oddities. Active Record has some issues. Action Controller has some oddities. This is not the strangest guy here, but I want to stimulate your imagination and your curiosity and share with you those other thoughts. So, I used to call action controllers subclasses Frankenstein controllers. Why is that? Take a second to read this slide. This is a typical scaffoldish controller that you can generate. It has a before filter to check if the current user is authenticated or not. It exposes a new endpoint to render a form, and it exposes a create endpoint for the form submission. I guess most of you are used to code like this, right? Do you think this is simple? But I don't think so. First of all, we have orchestration policies. Of course, this is a controller, and I expect that it does something in the end. So it's responsible to instantiate the record and try to save it. Second thing, this is also a router, because we have routing policies in the before filter and in the redirect to if the record is being saved. And also, it has rendering policies, because we are setting some view message with the flash notice, or we are rendering the form again if something goes wrong with the validations. So I think these are violations of single responsibility principle, and it violates boundaries by default, because of course rendering policies belongs to the view layer. And why this matters to your code? Because this is, of course, a simple controller, but I guess your controllers are more complicated than this. And this class ends to be changed too much, because it has too much responsibilities apart from the one that you choose to assign to it, because it's responsible for your domain, for your application. It's responsible to create post, but all those other responsibilities are inherited by the framework. So you are carrying on an heavy load of work just because you want to use active controller subclasses. And they are some way odd classes, because how can you replace this conditional here? I always bothered by conditionals like this, if, or case statements, because again, they open branches that are complicate a lot production and test code. And what if you need to inject this dependency? Simply we can't, because we can directly instantiate this class. The framework does this for us, and so we are, of course, thankfully for this thing. But we lose a lot of control, and this, of course, has some implication that I show you in a minute. But I want to talk about the third OOP violation that we have here, encapsulation violation. Okay, if you think about a Rails controller, you are used to this oddity too. But if you think to a controller like a Ruby class, you know that instance variables are meant to be private because they represent the state of an object, and of course they has to be private because we don't want to access to make them we want to make them encapsulate, because we don't want that external objects to alter the internal state. You know, this is basic OOP, but we are some way in a sneaky way extracting this instance variable and leaking through another layer, which is the view one, and also for testing purposes. I'll show you what I mean now. This is another code snippet, simplified code snippet, RSpec code snippet that can test that code. And first of all, this is not a unit test. This is an integration test, because normally when you need to test an object, you just instantiate it and stimulate some methods and verify that it behaves properly. But here, you have to stimulate an HTTP call to test an object behavior. So this is an integration test. This is some way odd. Since we cannot inject a dependency as we just seen, we cannot pass a mock within this class. We are forced from an outside perspective, because a test is an outside perspective of, from an object, to know exactly the method implementation that we are going to test, and do this ugly stub here. It would be much more easier to pass a mock here and look at the methods invoked on that mock. And the third thing here, this is a node helper that steals that instance variable from the controller, and it make available here with the state of a controller. So we are some way doing a strange TDD, a strange testing thing. We are stimulate HTTP and extracting the instance variable to see if everything was right. Of course, this increased the runtime, the time that your test suite needs to be run, of course, and this has some setup problems, because this is a simplified slide, a simplified snippet, but I ended up, even in Litmus, to need to stop 5, 6, 7 objects before to actually make the HTTP call. And of course, the third component is action view. What's wrong with the action view? there's a big problem. Views simply aren't views, they are template with logic. And we can see this separation in other frameworks. I guess Django or other framework has this separation. And even here, testability is an issue because we are forced to render a template and look at the markup that's generated from that partial or from that page and see if matching the contents, see if my presentational behavior was right or not. And we end up, without a proper views, we end up to pollute a lot models. How many times have you needed to show a user full name in 10, 20, 30 pages? Of course, you don't want to redefine the method over and over. You want to dry your code, so you end up to define that method in the model. But of course, that is a presentational behavior, and this encourages a lot of public methods to maintain that, of course, increase code responsibilities and, of course, code maintainability. So, a half-assed solution to this problem are helpers. But helpers are strange guys too. If you think that you define a Ruby module and you define some methods and you pass some objects to these methods, you do some string manipulation, some presentational manipulation, and return some value, but you, in the view, don't instantiate nothing. They came from nowhere. They are like functional global functional programming global methods. And of course this is a problem because your view layer, your view behaviors depends on templates first of all, and it depends on functions, not objects. And of course this is another problem that increase testability issues, and I know that most of the Ruby on Rails applications around never test these things. Look at these examples. See? User full name, what I tried to say before. We accept the user object, we do some string manipulations without any side effect. This is pure functional. And what about URL4? A typical orthodox OOP framework will be used a URL class with a class method for, but Rails is not the case. Rails uses URL for global function, and I dare you to find the right method definition in the API doc. If you look between action view and action controller, there are at least 4 or 5 method definitions with the methods called URL4. So if you need to look at the right guy, you are some way lost. I think Ruby on Rails is multi-paradigm as Ruby is. You know that with Ruby you can write some imperative, functional, and of course object-oriented code, and Ruby on Rails violates the boundaries of paradigms at convenience, but as you just seen, it increases code complexity, and of course, this is sometimes, all these problems are not always understood for newcomers to Ruby on Rails. But I showed you all these problems because I think they matters to productivity and code maintainability. And as last insight about Ruby on Rails, I consider Ruby on Rails not a framework, but an application template. Your application is not facilitated by the framework that's supposed to be a detail, but it's instead caged. Your behavior is caged by Ruby on Rails. because of the convention over configuration. And we are just backing at one of the successful points of the framework. So, of course, I'm here today not just to criticize Rails, but to share with you some guidelines that I follow after I get in troubles with Ruby on Rails applications. The first advice that I want to share with you is decouple your logic from Active Record as much as possible. You have seen before, Active Record speaks about data, speaks about persistence. Your models need to speak about behaviors, because this is the one of the main point of OOP development. And of course, don't think in active record terms. I've seen developers start with the database migration, thinking about all the needed columns and all the needed validations and all the needed associations without defining a test before, or without thinking about the behavior of that class. I guess that I do some upfront guess, without knowing how that class, how that model, because we are merging models with records, needs to behave in our application. But we are thinking about already about validations and so on. So move away from that logic. Yes, and let your public API to declare intents, as we seen before with the most recent published articles, because they mean something in your application, and they are the most precious documentation that you can use for yourself. If you look at the code after 5-6 months, after a year, or for the next developer that needs to maintain that application. Another advice. I've seen active record models to have everything public. And of course, this is a problem in terms of maintainability. Again, sorry if I always mention this problem, but this is the key reason why I decided to talk here today. And follow the least access principle that says everything has to be private unless it needs to be accessed on the outside. And if you think that you can leave a method public in your model because who cares, be sure that the day after your colleagues have used that method in 3, 4, 5 places. And of course, this is not a problem if your teams is just you and your peer mate. But this can be a problem if you have a team of 20 people hacking around that application, and if the code base has 1,000 lines of code. I'm some way anticipating another talk of this afternoon. Don't follow the principle of fat models. Fat models some way are our trash can where put everything without any upfront thinking about that. Don't be afraid to extract ad hoc classes for specific responsibility. Don't be afraid to extract classes for coherent and cohesive groups of variables or groups of behaviors. And I use a lot inner classes, which are powerful. They are meaningful to the algorithm that you are trying to write, and you don't have. They have the advantage that you don't have to maintain their code as public class, because they are inner classes, and you are telling to your colleagues, don't touch this, don't care about this. And eventually, of course, they are free to modify that code, but it's some way guarded by the fact that they are inner classes. They are powerful pattern that I follow a lot recently. And use presenters. I don't like too much Draper or all these fancy presentation frameworks. I just love to have plain Ruby objects and pass inside that presenters all the stuff that I need, and eventually, sometimes, if needed, I pass the view context if I need to render within the presenter a partial or a template. And of course, this helps you to control presentation, to control behaviors around presentation, to to clean up your models and clean up your views. This is, I think, a valuable advice. And last thing, refactor a lot. Refactor is not supposed to be a scheduled activity, but something that should happen every day, many times a day. Every time you finish something, think about the design, if you like it, and take the time, even 5 minutes, to refactor that code, and you are incrementally improving the design of your code, of course, and this helps you a lot the day after when you need to build, to improve and build incrementally a feature, because you have a clean desk where to start to build the next feature or improve the current one. So I was quickly, because I don't want to bore you too much with all my thoughts, but I'd like to discuss with you, since we have a bunch of minutes, I guess, and understand if all these thoughts or some of them make sense to you, if you never thought about Rails look at Rails with those eyes. Yeah, he said that he agrees with most of my thoughts, but he said that Rails, in the end, is a tool that facilitates a lot prototyping, basically. I agree with the utility of Rails, but I think that those violations are shortcuts. I mean, we know that global variables or static methods are sometimes handy, but they are not the proper way to do things. I mean, apart from Rails, global states, global shared states are easy because they are accessible for all the places, all the spots in your code. But of course, they are not a good practice that you want to do. And this is true with Rails. I mean, it has some facilities that intentionally violates, I don't know how much intentionally, by the way, but in some places they violate intentionally good practices and goes across the object-oriented paradigm and introduces some functional programming because it's more easier for developers. Yeah.
Every tool has some, has a target way.
Yes. He said that Rails basically is an opinionated framework, as it was always claimed by the HH. But and if you want to use it, you are free to use it, of course. If not fits your needs, move away and pick another tool. I agree with you. The thing here is, I mean, I'm here not to say that Rails is bad. I use on a daily basis, and I think again, this is a really powerful tool, and I love it. But today I'm here to share my opinions about the framework and what can be improved. For instance, I don't want to throw away Rails because it lacks of views. I want to say, okay, let's introduce views. That's all, and I'm here to talk about not the, I mean, all the technologies has some drawbacks, and I took for granted that most of you find the Rails a valuable tool for your job. But today I want to, talk about just the small amount of defects, that the pitfalls that the framework has. I
agree.
We agree too much.
But I love Ruby, not Rails. And said that, my thought is maybe we're trying to change change something that has been born to work in a way. Why changing this? So having variables in the view could be a drawback, but probably could be also one of the stronger points of the framework.
Yeah. So in reply to that, so the last application we worked on was kind of big. So the domain model wasn't classical wrong. But the full applications are very simple. You can use all the vectors, the Rails requires, and you are saying that's not fine. But as soon as the application grows, or as soon as you start working on an application that is big,
Okay, to this point I agree. So it's a big application, I agree. That's a problem. But I'm saying, like, if you are aware of the framework, how it is built, use it as for what you need it.
So, but guys, as I said before, I love Ruby, not Rails. Said that, my worry is that sometimes we took some tools that are built in order to solve some problems, and we are trying to use the same tools to solve other problems. That's my doubt.
yeah,
Yes.
I understand what you say, and it totally makes sense when I believe you want to use those layers of complexity on an application that is very simple. But in some cases, you know that the project is going to go on for like 8 months for those lives because it's a very
This is a good point. Thank you.
And just like another thing that in this project we separated out the logic and the. So in this project that we worked on, the last project I worked on, we separated out some of the models and controllers into engines. So there are a few talks online that talk about this approach, and you basically create compartments in your app, and you then mount those engines so that you have routes for a specific path. Just very quickly, you can grab me after if you want to have a chat about this, but it basically simplifies the way an application grows. But again, it only applies if the application is big. If it's a small app, if it's something you're going to work for a month, it's not worth, absolutely. But I still believe also, though, that active record is a pattern that fits when the domain model is simple. If it's complex, and I've seen it, I've got scars about that. I had to fight with active record models, like 300 lines, with so much logic, which is hard to test and hard to do everything. And I think that we have to admit it's something wrong, something that we can change without having to say that Rails does it wrong. It's simply our application is growing, and we need to handle that. But then again, if there is one model that is like that, and everything else is fine, you can sort of cope with it. It really depends on application to application. But yeah.
Yeah, of course, all these observations make sense in a big code base, and of course, Litmus is like Litmus is, and I think Ruby on Rails had some way lowered the entry level for web development, so many applications started with a single model, like he says, and then eventually grown up too much faster, and they never had the time to clean up the code, and they just followed what Rails said, and Litmus was born like Rails 1 application, and now we are on version 3, but you can see a lot of dead gems still around that we still have because we don't have the time to clean up that code. So we are some way patching some certain gems, dealing with fixtures, and dealing with the old versions of Cucumber. And this is, of course, when you don't have the time, and who has the time to clean up the code, you are screwed.
Okay. First of all, I agree with you with all the lines, and I'm happy that you have talked about this topic today. About his question, I think that what we have shown today is practical advices for people that have started a Rails application years ago and have to deal with the complexity of the current application. And the problem in the Rails community, but it's not only in the Rails community, is that we start to design our application around data. We take data and put them in the first place. The point here is to put in the first place behavior, our application behavior, our domain. If we take our domain and we put it in the first place, we start to change our application code to reflect this intent. We have to keep in mind that every time that we open an active record model, we should start to separate responsibilities. We should recognize domain responsibilities from persistence responsibilities. And we should take these persistence responsibilities away from the domain because they tend to complicate everything. Testing runtime, testing, testabilities of our classing, and so on. So when you were talking about refactoring, to refactor, we have to be very keen about searching the right responsibilities and assign to the right object. If we see an object that makes two things, we should create two objects, one for every responsibility. And the last thing is about the test code that you have shown about controllers. There are many other problems in that test because okay, like using mock to mock concrete class. We should use mock only to mock responsibilities. The mock objects are a tool to discover the responsibilities and assign them to other objects while we do test-driven development. And the instance variables are another encapsulation violation. Yeah, you have told them in the preview slide when we saw the controller, but it is a violation in the test too. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question more? Hi. In response to what he said just now, do you think that given all this problem with small problem with Rails given to Active Record, does it make sense still using Rails for this kind of big application, or should it choose another framework that is more, give us more flexibility and freedom to build the stuff like we should do?
In Ruby world, since we are at the Ruby Day, I want to say to you, still use Rails, because it depends on the code number of lines, on how many features you expect for a specific application. And of course, you can never predict if you are launching a product. And Sinatra is, I love Sinatra, but I don't think it can be scalable in terms of code organization, because everything it's different. I mean, one of the templating strengths of Rails is everything it's in the right place where you supposed to find it. Sinatra is not like that. It gives you more freedom, but of course this freedom has a cost in terms of code organization, and you have to carry on a lot of external gems to some way simulate Rails behaviors, Rails public APIs, and Rails it's like some way Apple products. I mean, everything makes sense if it's in that garden. If you are on Linux, okay, but that application can be run on your device and so on. And I think they stolen a lot of principles, even marketing principles, and in the end, use Rails.
Thank you. I like the presentation a lot. I just wanted to point out one thing. I was a PHP developer before becoming a Rails developer, and I honestly think that if Rails wasn't designed with those, let's call them flaws, I wouldn't have gotten it on the first place. I wouldn't understand what it was all about. Now I use tricks to circumvent these problems. For example, I don't use instance variables and controllers. I do use distance exposure for that. But I wouldn't have started to develop on Rails because if it was cleaner and more stringent to those principles. And on a second thing, I think that I've seen colleagues that try to apply the single responsibility principle too tightly, and you end up having 10 files with 3 lines each, and you just start jumping from file to file, and you can follow the order of things anymore, and it complicates stuff sometimes. So from a pragmatic point of view, I would say that all this stuff shouldn't be made by default, but only if necessary, in my opinion, and if simplifies the application, not if it obfuscates code.
Use Sinatra, so where everything a single file application. Okay, first think about the entry level. As I said before, I had some customers when I was a consultant, a Ruby on Rails consultant, that would never and ever started web developing or starting their companies without Rails, because they weren't at the time programmers. They were. I know a guy who is an architect and started an architectural website and business, and now they have, I think, 15 employees, yes, in their company. And if Rails never existed, that company never existed as well. So we are thankful to Rails to exist. But again, I think this is, I mentioned it a lot, TDD testing, I mentioned it a lot, OOP. We are talking about something different. We are talking about software engineering, not the market value of Ruby on Rails, which I think it's unavailable for most of the companies that I know. The second thing about code organization, if you end up every time to jump from class to class, you have to wonder why you need to jump into a class that if it has 3 lines of code, I guess it has just one responsibility, and why you need to jump there to look at the code, why that public API is not so meaningful from the outside perspective without jumping in that class, why not the class name is meaningful to you. Think about, I know that it can be annoying to jump from file to file, but I don't think it justifies the need of having all the behaviors in a few classes.
I can skip if you want. Okay. Ciao Luca. So I just want to remind everybody here that Race is a tool, and also Race is not a single product. Race is composed by 5 different gems. So if you don't want to use a specific gem or framework, you are free to split the framework and use, for example, MongoID or data mapper or whatever ORM you want to use. And at the same time, the fact that you're using Race doesn't mean that you can skip other quality practices like using presenters or different kind of features that are used in other different frameworks or languages. That said, well, we talk a lot, so actually I know a lot of the answers to this presentation, but I'm especially curious, especially from your experience in Litmus, what is the most effective, because we all know that all these suggestions are difficult to be implemented in a real world application, like almost everybody say, because you have to fight with the time, you have to fight with the complexity of big applications, and I know Litmus is a big application, so my question is, in a real world, what is, from your experience, the most effective change in the code, the most effective feature or implementation you did that improved the quality of your application, or especially Litmus, since you joined the company?
Yeah, just one. A refactoring advice, extract classes. That's the answer to you as well, because since it was built with gigantic models, active record models, there are some methods that are too much similar, and they scream, a class screams to be born. And what I do is try to write the tests for that gigantic model, and the tests, write properly written tests for that group of behaviors on the original class. Then, since of course that behavior is spread across the controllers or the views, I extract the classes, and sometimes, if it's convenient, to leave that public method for now, and but the implementation disappears, and it's indeed implemented in the new born class. So. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because concerns are evil. In the end, from a runtime perspective, you end up to have. Yeah. So thank you to be here. Those are my contacts.